the more bare ground you've got, the less forage you've got, and the harder it's going to be to raise something on it. Because it affects water infiltration, heat absorption, just so many factors there. And I think bare ground will tell you a lot about your grazing practices too. That would be the biggest thing to me is and whether you just use your eyes to develop that. And the key thing there is not looking out across the pasture. A lot of people talk about this. You have to get out of your truck or get out of your side by side or whatever and walk out there and look straight down.
Hi, I'm Danielle Duni, an agriculture specialist for the National Center of Appropriate Technologies, ATTRA, the National Sustainability Agriculture Information Service. I'm based in Montana.
Hey, and I'm Darron Gaus. Welcome to the Voices from the Field podcast. I'm also ag specialist for NCAT. I am based in Texas. And today we're diving into rangeland monitoring with Jeremiah Eubank of Pure Pastures in Texas. We want to hear from him what monitoring means, why it matters, and how to make it practical on your ranch. Jeremiah Eubank runs Pure Pastures, a family-owned multi-species grazing operation in the Texas Hill Country. Jeremiah's wife, Maggie, helps with the business, and even the kids are all part of it. Last time I was there, I saw his children were starting their own rabbit enterprise. Since 2019, they've been practicing regenerative agriculture, focusing on soil health, biodiversity, and producing nutrient-dense meat for their community. So welcome, Jeremiah. Let's go ahead and start about just talking, understanding rangeland health to start with. When you hear the term rangeland health, what does that mean to you?
Basically, it means that we're making sure that we're growing the appropriate grasses in the right places to feed our livestock and to ultimately feed, people. We want that rangeland to be healthy. I guess dense swards of different grasses and forbs, not just a monoculture of one thing out there. We want a lot of different stuff. And because we're a multi-species operation too, we're needing to feed different things. Cows eat different than sheep, then eat different from goats and deer and everything else. So we want there to be a lot of different options out there for all the different species. And to us, we're trying to, in a big way, return our ranch back to what it would have been 300 years ago before overgrazing and human intervention, I guess, really changed it.
With your goal of growing multiple different grasses, what are your first signs that you look for when you're out in the pasture to let you know that you're meeting that goal or you're not meeting that goal?
Well, in a lot of ways, we're not right now because, and Darron's been out here and seen it. We've got an overabundance of KR blue stem, and actually we're finding it's not just one species, but it's these multiple different species of old world blue stems. And I think that's a big story around here in Texas and other places as well, that's kind of taken over a lot of places and because it responds favorably in its favor to overgrazing, right? So where a lot of the native stuff has been grazed out. So we're just really looking for the native stuff to come back. And the big indicators for that for us are side oats, grama, Indian grass, switchgrass, little blue stem is one that's persisted fairly well here. It's kind of held out, and side oats we're starting to see a lot more of it come back. That's kind of one of our. I guess the side oats is the first indicator that we're getting back to the species that we're looking for.
Great. So sounds like your plant ID skills are top notch for grasses, and you're able to pick them out in different stages, or is there specific stage and headers that you're looking for that let you know you're on the right track for those natives, or maybe you need to move out of a pasture sooner if you're seeing a lot of your KR blue stem?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm good at it. I've just gotten better at it. Yeah, if you'd caught me about 6 years ago, I could probably pick out about 4 grasses, and that was it. Right now, this time of year, we're here in just the beginning of September, and this is really kind of getting into prime time to identifying those grasses because it gets a lot easier when they've got a a flower on them and a seed head, and especially they get really pretty too, right? The Indian grass. We're seeing a lot of Indian grass go right now, and so it's got that big, kind of feather shaped head on it and everything, and it's really pretty. So, like I said, now is a great time to get out there. It just gets a lot easier to identify them. And again, the Cytos grama, it's very distinctive in what it looks like, and it's the state grass of Texas, so we have to give it a lot of credence, and it's important to us. So. Yeah, we've learned a lot on which ones are better. It's taken, like I said, it's taken 4 or 5 years to really get good at identifying them. And like you said, watching them and how they're grazed. The different animals will graze different stuff. I mean, right now, and different times of year too. There's all these different factors in it. Like sheep right now, for whatever reason, they're not eating much of the side oats. They're actually eating a lot of the old world blue stems. That's been a good thing for us to see, is that we're getting good utilization out of that, because the cattle don't necessarily want to eat a lot of them when they get. We're pretty dry right now, so once those things mature and go to seed, they will tend to shy away from them if there's something else to eat.
Jeremiah, you mentioned just getting better at your plant ID. I think you and I kind of learned together from a colleague named Steve Nelly. You started working with NCAT almost 5 years ago now, and we started kind of doing a monitoring program on your land through our Soil for Water project. We just went out together and learned with Steve's advice and knowledge, and just ultimate respect for Steve Nelly on helping us do that. And also, I want to give our listeners just in the past 6 years that you have been doing this, there's been a lot of learning curves. 4 out of the 6 years, arguably all 6 years, we've been in a drought. How do those indicators of rangeland health kind of change, even like during a drought?
Well, first off, I'll agree with you about Steve. He's great. He's a treasure. I mean, he's literally wrote the book a couple of times on rangelands and grass identification and all that stuff. Yeah, drought it definitely plays a big factor. A lot of these grasses respond different to drought too. Like you said, we've had maybe 2 good years in there. 21 was a good one. Last year turned into a good one. It was good at the end of the year, or July, August got pretty decent. We got some rains, so it kind of changed things. It was different. It was really weird because we didn't get anything in May, which is typically our highest rainfall. I think the biggest thing is just, as far as drought goes, is watching it year to year and seeing how it responds differently. Different grasses will respond differently. The drought thing just takes so much more care on the grazing side. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't realize we're in a drought. Like, we don't see the drought coming, right? And we've probably got too many animals. I know in our case, we were carrying too many animals like last year, we were carrying too many animals for the drought that looked like it was coming. So we pulled all the cattle off of this ranch and moved them to another property that we utilize. Then we got all these late rains, at a weird time of the year, and it would have bailed us out even if we'd kept them here. It did allow all those grasses to come back. They had been grazed down, and then when we pulled the cattle off, they got a long rest. They came back really well. Back to the question, I guess, looking at it, it just takes a keen eye to look and see what's happening with those grasses, and you're still trying to predict the future, right? Those different grasses, you're going to graze them down harder. Some of them are going to get grazed harder. Some of them are going to get grazed less. It's really about good pasture management, I guess.
That's great. That makes me curious to know if there are certain signals that you see on the range that make you shift to knowing that you need to have a longer rest period. You talked about moving your cattle to a different operation. Was it seeing more bare ground? Maybe there's a lot more dust, high temperatures, lower precipitation that makes you adjust. And then with making that decision of removing the cattle for last year, how did that affect your grazing plan with rest rotation for this coming year?
Yeah, we were really looking at the precipitation, and we've got kind of some key dates that are, the beginning of June and then the beginning of July, and looking at where our rainfall totals are at right now, or, at those dates. And I can't think of, we have some percentage indicators and stuff that we look at to see if we're in line. And what happened last year is really what we were looking at was all the pastures in front of us that we haven't, that we hadn't grazed yet, and the pastures behind us. So we're looking to see how many, we've got X number of days in front of us. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but we were just looking at what grass was there, the number of pastures, the number of days we expected to be on each pasture, and saying, okay, we've got, say 40, 50, 60 days, whatever. If we don't get any rain, we'll have grass for that long. And then looking at the stuff behind us, like this isn't regrowing at all because it's getting so dry, or because of the moisture hasn't been there when it should have been there, or when we expected it to be there, I guess. And those pastures weren't coming back. So that's when we kind of made the decision, like, we've got this other place that's pretty low stocked right now. We'll pull all the cows off. We kept the sheep here. The sheep are harder on weeds and less hard on grass. So I didn't mind kind of hammering the weeds and the forbs, because honestly, this operation here, we're in this rocky, hilly ground. It's more well suited for sheep anyways. So we left them here and managed them in that same fashion. By moving those cattle away, we got a longer runway, I guess, for the sheep. They had more grass or more pasture in front of them, so we could stretch them out more. And then thankfully, we did get a bunch of timely rain at the end of July, and everything, basically right after we got everything moved out, it started raining. So that worked out. But yeah, I think it comes down to really looking at your recovery and how quick those grasses are regrowing. That's the kind of the key factor for us. And again, the days in front of you, not necessarily we're trying to leave stubble anyways. We're not grazing down to the ground. We don't want to see, if we're getting to bare ground, we've really got an overstocking problem, I think.
Jeremiah, you didn't tell him your secret weapon, and that just inviting me every time brought some rain with me.
Yeah. That's we tried doing the safe to fail trials and stuff, and we got 2 inches of rain that day, I think, and the next time we did it and we got another half or 3/4 or something. It was good. Yeah. Which reminds me, you hadn't been out here in a while.
Hey, Jeremiah, so you mentioned, that it takes a keen eye. So that's kind of what we're talking about here today, is just like tuning the eye, using monitoring to help tune the eye if you're not, used to it. So how did you learn to read the land? Was it trial and error? Was it a mentorship, formal training? How did you get into reading the land?
I think it's a little bit of everything. A lot of it started with just watching it after grazing it. A lot of it came from the transects that we did with NCAT and Steve coming out, and we, that was very formal and scientific. We measured it off. We had the 100-meter transect, and we did the square meter, we had the frame that was 1 square meter, and we'd set it down and identify every plant that was in it. And with somebody, thankfully, like Steve, that knew what he was doing, because I couldn't have picked out, maybe one or two out of those. So, but that was a big part of it. The other thing we've done Rangeland workshops. I think NCAT put on a couple of those with Steve. That was back when Kara was in your position. Went to those, and that was, a lot of grass identification, stuff like that. I've been to a couple holistic management deals. We've hosted a couple here at the ranch. So I think a lot of it is just the continuing education and being around groups like NCAT and holistic management. And we work with the Small Producers Initiative that's out of San Marcos at Texas State and Ken, and they put on some workshops and work with some of these other groups. And there's a lot of people out there now that are really focused on all this. You've got again, NCAT, holistic management, Noble research. They're doing some classes, understanding ag. I mean, there's so many programs and education opportunities out there. It's all the same message. It's just boxed a little bit different. So if you don't get along with one group, you can go find another, and they're going to repackage the same thing in a little different way. And they've all got their different spin on it. But ultimately, it's all the same focus. Just trying to get out there and get to those workshops and stuff, I think has made a big difference, especially when they're on a ranch and you're going to go, it's a field day and you're seeing stuff in person and touching it and just seeing how other people are doing it makes a big difference.
The peer-to-peer learning is such a key component of how, all communities can relate, but I think we really see that with ranchers and, often on those field day tours, they're talking about one thing over here and half the group is in the back. Like, is that what your corral looks like? And how did you get that? And where did you do those things? So it really is beneficial to be out there. I think it's nice to see all these different organizations have similar goals. And we're seeing that there's a lot of tools out there right now as well, apps or pasture map, tracking different platforms that are available, software management, as well as the old red book and, your pen and paper. What do you use to help your record keeping or monitoring your pastures and kind of make those decisions that affect your operation?
So yeah, we do use pasture map is a big key for us in tracking movements and rest days and everything else. I've worked with them to try and fix some things and change some things, and they've made some some changes that have improved that software. We have a program with NRCS, an equip contract where we do prescribed grazing, and we utilize pasture map for that as our reporting side of it. So within pasture map, you can take pictures of when you move in a group of animals and then when you move out, and that's kind of how we do a lot of the monitoring there to show that we're not overgrazing in pasture. So at the end of the year, I have those reports within there to just give to the NRCS people and say, hey, here's what we did, here's all the, rotations and all this stuff. And then they can pay off of that. And it works really well. Additionally, what we use and for just the monitoring stuff, it's a lot of just taking pictures. It's great with these iPhones now. You can just take a picture and with the geotagging and all that stuff and date, it's date stamped, it's time stamped, it's all this stuff, and you can go back and look and see where were we at and what did this pasture look like 5 years ago? What did and compare that, and then I try to keep good notes on our rainfall here on the ranch. So I've got a couple little spreadsheets that it's kind of like a calendar deal where I can put in the rainfall of the day before and just keep a log of it. And at the bottom, I've got it set up where it'll give me a monthly total and a yearly total and a 12-month rolling. And now I put averages in there too, because I've got, 4 or 5 years worth of data here. So we can look at monthly averages and try to establish those kind of critical dates and stuff based on the patterns very specific to this 2,000 acre ranch, because it's around here, rain can 15-20 miles away, which is where that's how far we are from San Antonio, and what the news is going to tell you that we're getting rainfall wise is vastly different from what we're actually getting. So it does really well to keep those dates. But like I said, with having that in combination with the pictures and stuff, we can go back and look and say, okay, this is what it was like 4 or 5 years ago. We were in this kind of rainfall pattern and this was what the range looked like. Are we better? Are we worse? Or what's going on there? And look at what species of grasses are in those pictures. And all our pastures are different sizes, but they're somewhat uniform in what's in them. And they'll be different. I'm saying within that pasture, a lot of what's in that pasture will be the same. It'll be totally different in different parts of the ranch. But just a couple of pictures can give us a good idea of what's actually there. So those are the biggest things for us. And I mean, it's simple. We're not trying to be fancy about it. I do keep some notes just in about half a dozen notebooks that are strewn around everywhere. And, there's one in my truck, there's one on my desk, I'll use one for a while and then I'll lose it. And so I have piles of notes and all sorts of stuff. So that's what's kind of worked well for us. And we're still using those transects that we had set up with Darron and NCAT, years ago. And we've gotten away from doing that stuff, but I'll still go back to those transects because I know, and we've got some record of what was in them, where we had, very scientifically monitored what was there. And now I can go back and see like, okay, 5 years, we didn't change hardly anything, or 4 years, whatever it was. these species didn't change, but we changed some management there recently, and now we're seeing different grasses. I think that's paramount, is trying to link your grazing to and changes you make to what you're seeing show up.
Yeah, like you said earlier, we've done the very formal monitoring with the transects for 4 or 5 years, and then we also did the safe to fail trials out at your place, where it was just a very, very quick 1 hour. You're an inquisitive mind, so you wanted to even extend that and try 2 things at once. But we kept that monitoring very simple, where it was just those pictures and the rainfall data and the temperature data, very simple things that you usually recorded anyway, because as soon as I asked you for them, you would send me the link to the Excel. It was easy. But if you just had to pick a few things to monitor, what would they be and why?
It depends on your goals, right? So, like I said, our goal here is to get back to a lot of native grasses. So we're looking at the species. I would say one of the most important ones probably is bare ground. The more bare ground you've got, the less forage you've got, and the harder it's going to be to raise something on it. Because it affects water infiltration, heat absorption, just so many factors there. And I think bare ground will tell you a lot about your grazing practices too. That would be the biggest thing to me is and whether you just use your eyes to develop that. And the key thing there is not looking out across the pasture. A lot of people talk about this. You have to get out of your truck or get out of your side by side or whatever and walk out there and look straight down. That's the most important factor if you're looking at bare ground, and whether you're going to go get a 1 meter square and put it on the ground and figure up that percentage of how much bare ground there. What is the deal with the baseball or softball? That's 1% of a square meter or something.
Baseball, yeah, anything like baseball, or we've used a tennis ball, or we even used a lot of ranchers, we're always fixing pipe. So we might have like a 2-inch end cap with us. That 2-inch end cap of a PVC pipe is perfect size for 1% of a meter square.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a good way to monitor that. That's pretty easy. But if you just train your eye to and take pictures, again, I keep going back to that. It's just so simple. And whether we like it or not, we all carry these things in our pocket all day long, every day. So we might as well use them. One thing on the phones I'm not a big fan of is the picture identification stuff. They've still got a ways to go on grasses for that. They don't identify grasses very well at all. It wants to call everything here some random grass from some faraway land that isn't even close. So I can look at it and go, oh, I know it's not that. So, but I mean, again, the phone's pretty handy for that. You got to kind of go back to the same spots, I guess, if you're going to do some of that with the picture taking and everything. You don't necessarily have to do the square meter thing. I think you can get a pretty good idea of what's there. Yeah, like I said, that would be the paramount thing for me. Again, unless you have different goals, if different changing the species there is the highest goal, then yeah, you definitely need to look at what's growing and why. Looking at, a lot of people get hung up on weeds, and we really don't, because we have sheep and they eat a lot of weeds. So there's plenty of times I'm thankful we have weeds, and different years are different. I called this year a cow year because we had way more grass than we had weeds. We actually had kind of a shortage of annual weeds at certain times of the year, where we would have had more had the rains come differently. It was much more favorable for cattle here this year, which makes sense because I didn't have very many cows and I had a lot of sheep. It's always the wrong thing, right? But we've made it work. But yeah, anyways, that's kind of my things that I think are pretty important on the most important things on the monitoring side. Is it's really operation specific.
Definitely agree that those plant IDs still need some work on IDs for grasses.
Yeah.
They'll work well on weeds, but too many times I've gotten people excited about Eastern Gamma grass or an Indian grass that they saw and go out there and it's just good old Johnson grass.
Yeah. One good tool on identifying grasses that I've used is go to the native seed companies and look at their pictures, because they're usually pretty good. So the ones I like here that are kind of local for us in Texas are Turner Seed and Douglas King Seed and Native American Seed. They've all got pretty decent pictures of what those grasses look like and you can use them to ID a bunch versus just whatever Google Images shows you. Usually it's not something that works well, but those seed companies have usually pretty good pictures that you can compare it to.
That's a great tip. I really appreciate your outlook on, these easy type of monitoring that you can do, whether it's just getting out of the pickup and it's looking at the ground, it's slowing down to take that time to really get across your pastures. And maybe it's, you're not getting off right at the road, you're going, more to the middle or that back section that you don't usually see. What's the hardest part that you find about monitoring, dumping the rain gauge or, making that time to get out?
A lot of times it's just remembering to go do it, right? And especially if you're trying to keep yourself on some kind of schedule. When we were doing the safe to fail stuff, we had a deal where we were going to do it every month, trying to remember like, oh, it's the first of the month. I need to go take these pictures. Sometimes they were a week or two late, but that was the biggest thing for me is just figuring out some schedule to get on for that type of deal. And it was very specific. Other than that, it's just a matter of doing it. You got to make it a priority and just value. You have to put value in it or you're not going to do it. And then you'll look back and go, oh, I should have been doing this.
So now that you've tried all these different methods, you're monitoring in many different ways. You've tuned your eye a little bit better. You have some intuition built in, right? And now, but you're also still monitoring. And so sometimes that can conflict sometimes. Just how do you balance what the data says with your own intuition and experience as that grows?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd leave this question out. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you there. Because it's a conflict. A lot of times you look at this and you go, man, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like the same as it was last year or whatever. You're comparing it to years before. Again, I'll relate it a bunch to rainfall because it's, that's so much of what we do is based on it revolves around rainfall, right? It's very much in conflict a lot of times because you'll look and you'll go, well, the rainfall shows that we've had X amount or what, and that's the same as it was 3 years ago, but we don't have half the forage we had 3 years ago. And so sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And there's just, I'll attribute that to a lot of different factors that we don't, that we're probably our mind just cuts out. Right. So maybe that rainfall came in totally different patterns. Maybe we got a big 3-inch rain at one point versus we got a bunch of, 1/4-inch rain strung together that evaporated because the heat was too much or something. I don't know, it could be anything. But yeah, it's a struggle sometimes just to make the two jive.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation too out in the field of just, letting nature do its thing, right? Our friend Garrett Coons says often, that everybody wants to live in this microwave pace society, but nature works at a crock pot pace, right? You do what you can, you monitor when you can, as often as you can, and then you use your own intuition and experience and learn from those mistakes or successes and just in how to adapt from there. I mean, for instance, I know, monitoring what we called the KR pasture for that segment, there's one year that it looked worse than it should have because we got more rain, but yet it was looking worse than the year prior with more rain. Then I remember you getting out your pasture map and seeing when was the last time they were here, how long were they here, how long was it between, rest periods. Just a lot of decision making that has to go on, and you adapt your grazing plan as necessary, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, pasture map in a lot of ways is supposed to be a planning tool. Right or wrong, I don't necessarily use it that way as much as we should probably. It's really more of a historical tool for me. And we look at it, again, just like you described, going back and saying, okay, here's what we're seeing. How did we get here? Right. What did we do in the past? How many times, how long ago were we here? How long did we stay? How long, what were those rest periods in between? I think by having that history and going through those processes, you can, that's part of how you're training that keen eye to understand and try and predict what's going to happen here next time. If we don't like what just happened, okay, next time we graze this, we either need to be off of it, a day or two sooner, or we need to graze less stock on it or do something different. And then by the iterations of that, right, is how you get better and you get faster at it and everything. So I think that's kind of key there is just having that history to look back on and try to understand how you got to where you're at.
As you're monitoring and collecting a lot of data, is there any data that you don't end up using that you collect? And how do you kind of shift what that looks like?
I think the one thing that I haven't really utilized much of is soil samples. We've gotten soil tests done and looked at, the NPK and the Haney test and all the stuff, the bacterial to fungal ratio and all that different stuff. We haven't made many changes based on that. Really, I think of it as kind of a benchmark. We'll come back in 10 years and do another soil sample and test and see, okay, we've changed the organic matter by hopefully like 2 or 3%, probably not. But yeah, I think that's the biggest one where we haven't really utilized it. And consequently, it's the most expensive one too. I mean, we spent couple $1,000s total across a bunch of different soil samples at different times. I have not gotten a couple $1,000s worth of value out of it at this point. Like I said, it'll be nice to have in the future when we come back and say, hey, we've done this and try to see what we've actually accomplished. I don't know if you can translate that to a dollar figure or whatever. If we could show that we've gained a couple of, or even 1% of organic matter, I mean, that's an inch of rainfall, right? That the soil will hold. So that's significant, but the range conditions will improve just as much. We'll see a difference there. We won't necessarily need a soil test to tell us that's why. So I'd say that's the one I would say is of least importance, unless there's, some weird anomaly where something just won't grow. I guess you could you might use it for some site like that, but to see if there's a major problem there of some kind of, giant mineral deficiency or, something like that. But other than that, that's the one I could kind of throw away.
And in the kind of opposite of that, like of the most influential, like of your monitoring, what has influenced your grazing plan and or your long-term goals the most?
I don't know if I could put that down to one thing. I think it's just a combination of all. The consistency is the thing that would have the most effect is when you're going out there and doing it every week or every month or whatever, just on a consistent basis and trying to tie those observations back to what you've done. Again, establishing that history and the kind of the cause and effect relationship out of it all. I think the transects are really good because you set up a specific place and you look at it over a long term. That's one, we've held on. We've kept using those transects that we set up those years ago. Like I said, I think that's especially in either sensitive or key areas, or if you've got a ranch that's just nearly all the same, which I don't think anybody probably does, if it's of any size at least. But you're going to have the most productive areas. The places I would want to look at it are the most productive area and the least productive area. Focus on the most productive area first, because that's going to have the most economic impact to you too. So that's going to be your most important. And then you could also look at that least productive to try to, bring it up. But it's going to be the one you're going to see less results out of too. It's going to be harder to move the needle, I guess.
It sounds like over time on your operation, you've done a great job of developing place-based knowledge, from tuning your eye to using different tools to just your everyday tasks that you're completing. But as we kind of shift into this realm of technology focused, there's so many different opportunities for things like virtual fence. How do you see that shaping rangeland management or using some of that in your operation in the coming years?
I hope it's good. I hope AI gets there to where we can take a picture of a pasture and it can help us with all this identification and stuff. We talked about the plant IDs not being very good, and hopefully that'll get better where it's more able to, we're able to utilize it better. The virtual fencing is something that we've we've been looking at it for a couple of years. It doesn't necessarily make sense to us right now from a cost perspective in our situation, but it's definitely something we consider, especially the way we fight electric fences here. When it dries out, they get and you've got sheep, you know this. They can be tough to keep in at times. So the cattle are pretty easy to keep trained, but right now we've been fighting sheep a lot on keeping them in, and that's one of the downfalls of virtual fences. It doesn't. The economics on it and sheep just don't work. I think they will get there on cattle, but they got a long ways to go on sheep to get that cost down. I think those are really good. And again, we've been talking about the virtual fencing more here lately. At times it gets very hard for us to put up temporary paddocks here in certain places because, again, it's so rocky and hilly. That's where virtual fence could help us, is that we could create much smaller paddocks and move more frequently and with higher densities and everything. And it would help us change that a lot. Right now, it's a lot more difficult because we can't necessarily divide these pastures up. Yeah, if we got to that in the future, it'd be nice. But again, I don't know that the cost at this point really justifies it. So, and other technology wise, I think they're doing a lot more. There's a lot more with GPS, not necessarily on the collar side, but just on the tracking. I know there's GPS ear tags out there and stuff. Some of that comes along, and you can monitor just their grazing patterns a little bit more and the way the animals move. That would be nice to see some, especially the bigger rangeland stuff out west. You'd be able to see where they're grazing more, where you can't go touch them every day. You can't go put eyes on them. You maybe turn them out for the season and then come catch them in the fall, right? On, hundreds of thousands of acres. Whereas if you could kind of track their movements, you could maybe influence their grazing in different ways, whether it was with collars or just going out there and herding them around to get them away from riparian areas or whatever, So I think there's some stuff there that's happening that will be effective and good. I don't know. I think that's about all the technology I'm really aware of. So
Jeremiah, so just to kind of distill down today, I've heard you say consistency and shoe slogan of just do it. But if you just give one piece of advice to our audience of, what's the important thing to start monitoring the land?
Just get out there and look down. I mean, that's it. And like you said, it is the consistency. I think that's important. You can't just go do it once or twice a year. Ideally, you're going to do it before you go into a pasture and right after you come out, and try and keep some record of that. Again, even if it's as simple as a picture, or you write down notes. And the other thing I didn't talk about was just a grazing stick, or some type of measurement deal. It doesn't have to be the NRCS or the GLC grazing stick. Go to Home Depot and buy a yardstick, and or keep a tape measure in there and measure your forage going in, or measure it coming out. Going back to holistic management, they've got a program they call STACK, which is using your boot and your leg and certain points on your leg to measure the height and determine how much forage there. And I'd encourage people to look into that. And by measuring your forage in and out, you can see how many days you can keep those animals there and what your forage production is. And how much you utilized while you were there when you come out. So yeah, I think those are pretty important.
Lots of important things today, Jeremiah. Thanks so much for your time today. I know this is going to help a lot of folks out, especially if you're just starting or wanting to start a more official monitoring program that's simple and made for you and your goals. So a lot of great ideas today. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, or how do folks find you or your operation or purchase your products?
They can go to our website. It's purepasturestx.com. You're welcome to send me an email. It's just Jeremiah@purepasturestx.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. So yeah, in any of those is probably the best way.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah. This has been very informative, and I look forward to maybe visiting your operation one day.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Great.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Thank y'all.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.